So much volcanic activity. Look what he wrote beneath the stamp. Official proof of the volcanic activity in Nicaragua. So not a good location for a canal to be built. Well, amazingly enough, his strategy worked. The Panama location won the vote. It was fairly close. It was 42 for Panama and 34 votes for the Nicaraguan route. So through all this congressional debate, President Theodore Roosevelt, of course, had taken an active participation. He was openly in favor of the Panama location eventually, and because he originally backed the Nicaragua location. Well, Berea work was not nearly finished. He was so instrumental in having the Panama Canal completed and selling it to the USA. So, Panama at this time was still a province of Colombia. And Panama then declared its independence in November 1903 from Colombia in a very quiet revolution. Orchestrated by who else? Berea. And also, President Teddy Roosevelt took a very active part. He sent a U.S. gunboat with Marines to Colon in Panama, which, well, the isthmus was now Panama. Their presence was a determining factor in the success of the Panamanian independence movement. Remember earlier that 1846 treaty between the U.S. and New Grenada? Well, that treaty had been passed down to Colombia when it became an independent country. That treaty was the instrument that the president used as a basis for sending in the Marines. He said the USA was protecting the right to transit across the isthmus. Well, the presence of the U.S. Marines had prevented the Colombian troops from coming in to put down the revolution. So Panama went ahead and became independent from Colombia. Immediately after the revolution, our good friend Berea negotiated a treaty between the U.S. and Panama allowing for the construction of the canal, even though he wasn't a Panamanian. Guy was amazing. Well, Berea also negotiated the establishment of the U.S. Canal Zone before the new Panamanian officials could reach Washington, D.C. So here you can see the canal zone that he put together. It's roughly 10 miles across, all the way across the isthmus. They just follow this perforated line, and this was the canal zone created by this Frenchman, Berea, on the behalf of the United States. And of course, now, hey, how about it? We want our $40 million bucks. You can buy what we have. Well, construction of the Panama Canal by the U.S. started in May 1904, just 6 months after the Panamanian Revolution. So we all know the effort was successful in spite of tremendous obstacles, including, again, disease, huge mudslides, and removing millions of tons of dirt, and also this required an enormous workforce. Well, we're going to jump ahead now. We're going to look at some more recent history related to the use of the canal and some of the fairly recent changes. So we'll look at some historical information about the traffic through the Panama Canal. So even at one point, I want to add that the United States even debated the need for locks on this project. Well, the engineers eventually realized that locks would be inevitable. They had to be built, period, for this project to be completed. As you probably know, there are 3 sets of locks. The first set we go to here at the Miraflores locks. Then we go to the Pedro Miguel locks. We go up a little further, then we enter the Gaton Lake. This is an artificial lake created for the passage of ships across the isthmus. And then the last set of locks is the Gaton lock that'll take us back down to sea level. So the ship will be raised 85 feet. That's what the locks do. So it'll take us up 85 feet after we pass the first two locks, and then lower us down 85 feet for our approach to the Atlantic Ocean side. Well, one of the things that's really amazing about the Panama Canal, it included building one of the largest earth dams ever built. The Canal Dam is 1.5 miles long and 105 feet tall. It created one of the largest artificial lakes at the time. The Canal Lake is approximately 164 square miles. But without it, this whole project never would have worked. It included building the largest concrete structure ever built, and this was, of course, the Canal Lock. It's almost 1 mile long, and more than 2 million cubic yards of concrete were used in the construction. Well, among the first men the U.S. sent to Panama was a gentleman named Dr. William Gorgas. At the time, he was a colonel in the U.S. Army. Why would they send this colonel down to Panama? Well, they sent him to Panama because of the poor health conditions and because of his expertise in tropical diseases. He already had this theory about mosquitoes being the carriers of yellow fever and malaria. Well, he was much ridiculed by the military and by the U.S. government because of his theory. He did, though, eventually prevail, but he sure had a tough time convincing the government and the military that this was the real cause of these two diseases that were killing thousands of the workers. Well, he gained his expertise in Cuba after the Spanish-American War. He worked there with none other than Dr. Walter Reed, for whom the hospital, of course, in Washington, D.C. is named after. The other big mover and shaker was this gentleman here, John Stevens. He took the Panama Canal Project over in June of 1905. How many people here from Washington State? Anybody? Okay, somewhere near Seattle, perhaps? Well, when you drive over Seattle to the Okanagan, you go across Stevens Path. Well, it was named after this gentleman here, John Stevens. He built, at that time, the longest railroad tunnel in the United States, and so that's why it's named after him. I'd just like to share that with you folks from Washington. And everyone else, for that matter. But anyhow, on his arrival in Panama, he decided there should be a very, very radically different approach to some of the basics of the project. He believed there's some things other than the actual canal construction that were more important. Remember, first and foremost, John Stevens was a railroad man. Well, he halted the excavation work, and he even sent the shovel operators back home for a period of time. Then he started a huge project to construct entire communities for the workers and develop a system utilizing the railroad to move out the tons and tons of dirt on a 24/7 basis. Some workers had to live in these tent camps at the time before Stevens' infrastructure project began. If you can't take care of your workers, how are you going to build a canal? That was essentially his approach. Other workers lived in railroad cars like this. He decided to create, again, permanent quarters for all the workers. All these gentlemen here are from the country of Spain. So he created an enormous, huge improvement over what the men had previously been using for housing. Housing, as well as everything else in the canal zone, was segregated. This segregation was not only white versus black, but also American versus non-American. So while Americans were paid in gold, and non-whites and non-Americans, they were paid in silver. So this led to a very common designation during all of the construction years of the canal. You're either a gold employee or you were a silver employee. So these designations carried also over to housing facilities. Separate facilities were provided for each classification of worker.